And he said, then said his wise men and Zeresh his wife unto him, if Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shalt surely fall. And while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains, and hasted to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. So they're discussing this fall. Remember, first they're saying, oh yeah, build the gallows, do this and do that. You know, you're second in the kingdom. You can do whatever you want to Mordecai. Now they're going, uh-oh, you're going to take a fall. Same counselors. You know, sometimes counsel's bad. Sometimes people give you counsel that is no good. And that's what they gave him. But what? It suited his personality, didn't it? He wanted to do something bad to Mordecai, so they just kind of encouraged him. They were yes men and women. Oh, yeah, do it. It'll work out fine. It didn't. Now we're back in Esther 7. Here's where we begin today. Esther 7:1. So the king and Haman came to the banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed even to the half of the kingdom. Then Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request, for we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, who is he, and where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. So Esther is asked by the king once again, what is thy request? This is actually the third time, because the first time she goes in, she was afraid to go in because the king had the right to put people to death if they weren't bidden to come to him. But he lowered the scepter to her. She touched it. And he said, what's your request? And she said, well, I want you to come to a wine banquet. So he takes Haman at her request. The king and Haman come to the wine banquet. He says, then, what is thy request? And she told him again, I'll tell you at tomorrow's banquet what the request is. This is the third time that the king asks her what his request is. And so she pleads for her life and the life of her people. She tells the king that her and her people were to be destroyed, slain, and to perish. And that is basically quoting from the decree that was sent out to the provinces. The decree in Esther 3:13 said, and the letters were sent by post into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews. Had Haman known she was a Jew, he probably would not have came up with that decree. But now he knows that the queen is a Jew. He's in trouble. I'm sure he would have found an excuse to stay away from that banquet had he known what was coming down, had he known Esther was a Jew and going to bring this on his head. You know, the king immediately sides with his queen, which is a good thing. He stood for his queen. And he wants to know who would do such a thing. Now, maybe he forgot that he signed that decree a while back about destroying the Jews. He might have forgotten that. I don't know. Maybe he's angry that he fell for Haman's scheme to destroy the Jews out of the land, but he is not happy. And when Esther lets the king know by saying, this wicked Haman is the adversary. The king gets very angry. Mordecai's going downhill fast. He's going there to get, Haman is going downhill fast. He went there to get Mordecai hung. He has to honor Mordecai. Now he's at this banquet, and the reality comes out that the queen is a Jew, and she's upset, because he told his family, the queen's having me at these banquets, and I can't be happy as long as Mordecai's alive. So that's why they told him to build this gallows that's 50 cubits high. He's humiliated, and then he goes home, and his wife and the counselor say, oh, man, you're going down. You're headed for a fall. Nothing you can do about it. And now he's afraid because the king's angry with him. Ester 7:7. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. And Haman stood up to make request for his life to Ester the queen. For he thought that there was evil determined against him by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine. And Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Ester was. Then said the king, will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbonah, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. The king walked around a little bit to think about what happened. He went into the garden. Proverbs 22 tells us the fear of a king is as a roaring lion. Whoso provoketh him to anger sinneth against his own soul. A king had ultimate power. It wasn't like you had a judge and a jury, even a crooked judge and a jury. You get to say something. The king could just say, as he did about Haman, hang him on the gallows. They drug him off and hung him immediately. There was no appeal. There was nobody going to save him from that gallows. If you made the king angry, you could pay for it in the past. You better realize that. And the king had counselors, right? But he was supreme. He was the ruler. He did what he wanted. His judgment would be followed. If the king judged you worthy of death, unless God intervened, you were dead. God was the only one with authority above a king. And so the queen is on her bed. Now, this is not a bedroom kind of bed. This is a couch. If you remember in the first part of Ester 1:6, and we're talking about out in the garden when he's having this 7-day feast, where were white, green, and blue hangings fastened with cords of linen and purple to silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black marble. Now, this is out in the garden area at this big feast. The beds we're talking about are couches. Instead of having chairs like we would and sit at a table to eat, they had these low couches, and they would lie on them and eat and just sit there. If you recall, I talked about the Lord's Supper. You see the paintings of it, and you see them sitting around a table. Well, it's more likely that they were on those low couches, and that's how the Apostle John, the apostle that Jesus loved, was on his bosom. That's how that could work. He was not leaning across a chair, but on a couch. And so this is not a bed that you would sleep on at night. It was more like we would eat in our living rooms on the couch. You get a lot of people over, you don't have room at the table, everybody scatters out. Well, That was their normal thing. You eat on a nice, comfortable couch. The Jewish writings say that the beds that we would call couches were of lamb's wool. They were very soft. By the description there, the posts were gold and the feet were silver. You know, wealth. You got some money if your couch has some silver posts or gold posts and silver legs on them. Haman was filled with wrath when the king wouldn't bow down to him. Oh, I'm sorry, the Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him. And now he's at the queen's feet, begging her for mercy. He's begging, because the king's mad. I think Esther's pretty upset herself, but he's pleading with her for his life. Some say that it was a common custom for the Greeks and Romans that if you were begging somebody, they were standing and you wrapped your arms around their legs or feet. You know, you're right at their feet, humbling yourself and begging for mercy. But you know what? Haman had zero mercy for Mordecai and for the Jews. He had zero. James 2:13 tells us, "For he shall have judgment without mercy that hath showed no mercy. And mercy rejoiceth against judgment." Haman showed zero mercy, and that's what he received. The king said, hang him. That was it. It was instant. He faced his judgment. Now, mercy could have rejoiced against that, but Haman showed no mercy. The king showed him no mercy. And if we judge without mercy, don't expect mercy from God. That's the way it is. It's the same if we seek forgiveness, but don't forgive other people. Same thing. So now, Haman is lying down, and the king comes in, and it looks kind of improper. And he says he's going to force the queen now. He was not serious. He was just saying how angry he was, is basically what he is talking about. You know, he didn't think Haman really had that intent, but he showed his disgust for Haman by accusing him of that. Just said, you are not a decent person. You're wicked like my queen said you were. He now hated that man that he promoted to second in the kingdom. And so Harbona, as we read, tells of the gallows. And, you know, there's a gallows over in Haman's house made to hang Mordecai. Big, tall thing, too. And so they didn't waste it. You know, they hung Haman on it. And that appeased the king's anger. Now we go to Esther 8:1. On that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her, and the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman, and Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king and said, if it please the king, and I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. So Haman devised this strategy to kill the Jews, to take their possessions. It turned around on him. He's dead, and his possessions are given to Esther. And she appoints Mordecai steward over the house of Haman. And Esther then pleads for the king to deliver the Jews. They have to have a writing to do so. Esther 8:11. Wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, both little ones and women, to take the spoil of them for prey. Upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar. Remember, Haman had his, I don't know what you want to call them, fortune tellers, soothsayers, you name it. They cast lots for what day, and they cast for every day of the year. And when God set it out, right, it was the 12th month, the middle of the month. They had a long time to prepare for this to come because of God. But now, the king gives the Jews the right to defend themselves. They can do what their enemies were intended for him, because the letter that he signed to destroy the Jews couldn't be taken back. Because if you read in the Bible, Esther 1:19, it says, if it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and Medes that altereth not. The Medes wouldn't change their laws. It's not like if our state legislature passed a law, then 3 years later they can go back and change it. The only way to change this law was to write a decree that would overcome it. That law was still there. Those guys could still go and kill the Jews, but the Jews had the right now to defend themselves, to fight back. If you think about it, in the book of Daniel, that's what happened to Daniel. King Darius made this decree that nobody could pray to anybody but him for 30 days. And Daniel, as usual, I think it was 3 times a day, got down on his knees, his windows are open, and he prays. And it's not a silent prayer. He's praying to God. And all these guys, the presidents that are below him, and the princes, they go to the king. Oh, he's violating that law, king. You can't change it. We don't alter our laws. And so Daniel did go in the lion's den. We know that God saved him out of a wicked decree as well. And so the Jews could gather. They could attack their enemies when they can. And they even could take the spoil, the possessions of their enemies. Esther 8:17. And in every province and in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. God working in hearts. Remember, he worked in the hearts of the Egyptians, that when they went out, they didn't go out empty-handed. They went out with all kinds of spoil. Here, the people see God working, and they say, I want to be a Jew. I want to be on God's side. I want God to help me like he's helping these people. And so they're happy. They have this deliverance. They have a way out of this decree that's been over their heads for a while now. Turned around, a lot of people became Jews. You know, God's taking care of his people. We see it throughout the Bible where God has done it, and I think if we would concentrate on it, think about it, we could see in our lives where God has delivered us, where God has taken care of us, where God has worked out things that we couldn't do. And even though God's not mentioned in the book, we see him working. And you know, that shouldn't really happen in our lives, right? When we see God working, we should let others know. We should praise God. Be vocal in your praising God when things work out. When they're not working out, pray harder, pray more. Ask for your brothers and sisters to pray for you. But God works, in the lives of men. And we're thankful for that. Heavenly Father, I praise you for just the fact that you do care for us, that you take care of us, that, Lord, you work in our lives, that you help us. I pray that we would remember the things that only you could do in our lives as we serve you. Never forget them, I pray in Jesus' name, amen.